you know? Rewind that. Who's driving?
You're driving.
Understand.
You're the lightest guy we got.
Now I hear you.
It started with a repair that was supposed to be quick, the type that usually fades from memory as soon as it's finished. But when AZN took a closer look, familiarity gave way to awareness. What he uncovered had been concealed for far longer than anyone would have expected, enduring race after race without ever signaling a problem. The most frightening part was not simply its presence, but the fact that it had waited in silence, always just a narrow margin away from altering everything forever. The repair uncovered. The repair started the way countless ones before it had, with routine taking precedence over urgency and muscle memory directing each step. For Azerbaijani Manat, jobs like this rarely held tension. Racing cars require non-stop upkeep, and most issues reveal themselves quickly, through subtle vibration, unusual sound, or a change in feel. This one had done none of that. At first glance, the problem seemed minor, the type that encourages speed instead of caution. There were no hints of impending failure, no warning signs that suggested anything beyond standard wear. Within the world of street outlaws, routine fixes are trusted because they follow patterns. That sense of predictability disappeared the instant the part was removed. What AZN discovered did not match what experience had prepared him for. The damage was not new, not accidental, and not aligned with normal racing strain. It appeared intentional in its neglect, concealed in a location rarely examined closely unless something has already gone wrong. Yet nothing had failed. That detail was the most disturbing. The understanding arrived gradually. This was not a failure waiting in the future. It was a failure already unfolding, quietly, over time. The car had been operating with a hidden weakness, carrying danger through every pass without anyone realizing it. AZN stopped, not to think, but because instinct demanded it. The mood inside the garage shifted instantly. Tools remained untouched. Conversations fell silent. It was the silence that follows realization, not uncertainty. What made the discovery frightening was not only what was uncovered, but what it meant. The issue sat in a place where failure would not build slowly. It would happen all at once. No warning, no correction, only consequence. AZN recognized immediately that this went beyond a simple mechanical oversight. Something had either been missed or allowed to continue unchecked. Both possibilities mattered. In racing, unseen issues are the most dangerous because they reshape beliefs about safety and control. One question surfaced without hesitation: how long had it been there? As the car remained open and exposed, it became evident that habit had nearly concealed something far more serious. A repair meant to last minutes had revealed a risk measured not in lost races, but in outcomes nobody wanted to name. AZN did not exaggerate the moment. He did not have to. The evidence was clear, and it altered the direction of everything that followed. This was no longer maintenance. It was a discovery. The unseen discovery. After the initial shock faded, AZN relied on what years of experience had conditioned him to do. He stopped reacting emotionally and began documenting methodically. Panic has no place in a garage, especially when a discovery threatens to overturn assumptions everyone depends on. He revisited the area carefully, moving slower now, tracing edges, observing stress patterns, and confirming what his instinct had already warned him about. This was not a random defect. It carried structure, history, and intent within its form. Its placement alone was troubling. The weakened section sat in an area engineered to absorb force and distribute load evenly under extreme conditions. Any vulnerability there does not reveal itself slowly. It waits. It endures. Then it releases everything in a single moment. AZN understood that the only reason catastrophe had not already happened was timing, not protection. As he followed the damage outward, the picture became clearer. Microfractures extended from a central point, pointing to repeated stress cycles rather than one isolated event. That meant the car had been running, racing, and accelerating, while the flaw quietly expanded. Each pass down the road widened the gap between control and disaster without anyone realizing it. What disturbed AZN most was the lack of secondary clues. There was no unusual wear elsewhere, no compensatory damage. The system had adapted around the defect, disguising it so thoroughly that routine inspections never caught it. This kind of hidden adaptation is dangerous because it creates false confidence. Everything feels normal until suddenly it is not. The discovery also raised difficult questions about procedure. inspections had been completed, maintenance records were current. Nothing pointed to negligence in the conventional sense. The issue existed in a blind spot formed by familiarity, where repetition slowly replaces scrutiny. When something has never failed before, trust often becomes excessive. AZN recognized that trap immediately because he had fallen into it himself before. Racing rewards consistency, and consistency encourages assumption. Components that have always held are expected to continue holding. This flaw exploited that belief perfectly. It existed where trust was strongest. As he continued examining the area, more details surfaced that deepened concern. The damage showed evidence of heat exposure inconsistent with normal operating conditions. That suggested the flaw was not just structural, but reactive, changing under stress in ways that would accelerate failure once certain thresholds were crossed. That realization turned discomfort into urgency. AZN understood then that this was not simply a missed inspection. It was a systemic weakness, the kind that does not belong to a single car or team, but to an entire approach to checking, assuming, and moving forward without reevaluating foundational components. That broader implication made the discovery heavier. Within the street outlaws world, cars are constantly evolving. Modifications build upon modifications, each altering load paths and stress distribution. Over time, original tolerance assumptions become outdated. This flaw existed because evolution had outpaced reassessment. What AZN was never supposed to notice was not just the damage itself, but the implication that others could be driving with similar unseen risks. The garage suddenly felt smaller, the silence heavier. This was no longer about repairing one car. It was about confronting a possibility no one wanted to face. He began mentally replaying past runs, imagining how close things may have come without anyone knowing. Near misses took on different meaning. Incidents once dismissed as luck looked different through this perspective. The line between coincidence and warning blurred uncomfortably. AZN resisted the urge to speculate aloud. Speculation spreads faster than clarity, and clarity was essential. He centered himself on facts. The flaw had been there for some time. It had grown quietly. It had avoided detection because it lived in a trusted zone, and it carried the potential for catastrophic failure without warning. That was enough. The next step was containment. AZN knew that how this information moved was just as important as the information itself. Panic could cause rushed decisions. Silence could allow danger to persist. Balancing awareness and restraint was critical, and he felt that weight immediately. As others gathered to look, reactions were subdued but intense. No one joked, no one minimized it. The damage spoke clearly. This was not a hypothetical risk or an edge case. It was real, present, and unforgiving. Someone asked how long it might have existed. AZN did not respond right away. Estimating time required careful analysis, and guessing would help no one. What mattered was not the exact duration, but the fact that it had lasted long enough to matter, long enough to alter everything. The discovery reframed recent history. It challenged the belief that absence of failure equals safety. It reminded everyone that racing lives on margins thinner than comfort allows, and that familiarity can become the most dangerous blindfold of all. What AZN was not meant to see had been hiding in plain sight, protected by trust and repetition. Now that it was visible, it demanded action not just from one garage, but from a community bound by shared risk. The repair that began as routine had crossed into reckoning, and once that line is crossed, there is no returning to assumption. Extended presence. The most disturbing question was not what had been uncovered, but how long it had been permitted to remain. For AZN, that question carried significance far deeper than simple curiosity. Time turns defects into threats, and the longer a flaw goes unnoticed, the more assumptions it quietly dismantles. Standing over the exposed damage, it was evident this was not new. It carried a past. The earliest clue appeared in the consistency of wear. Sudden damage leaves disorder behind. This did not. Certain edges were smoothed over, indicating repeated stress cycles rather than a single catastrophic event. That level of wear only develops when a car has been run, stopped, adjusted, and run again repeatedly, while the flaw evolves alongside every other component. AZN began mentally reconstructing recent timelines. Races completed cleanly, passes that felt stable, setups that responded exactly as expected. The car had given no signal that anything was wrong, which meant the defect had existed quietly through moments now remembered as reliable. Stability, seen through hindsight, felt misleading. Inspection records came next, not because negligence was suspected, but because process always leaves traces. The logs showed routine checks, consistent maintenance, and no gaps pointing toward oversight. That was the issue. Everything had been done correctly according to established procedure. The flaw lived outside what the routine was designed to see. That led to an uncomfortable realization. If the issue had existed this long without being caught, it was not hidden by carelessness. It was hidden by confidence. Confidence in a component that had never failed. Confidence in a design assumed to be unbreakable. In this case, confidence had become camouflage. The timeline stretched backward further. The damage showed evidence of surviving multiple configurations, meaning it predated recent changes. It likely originated earlier, during a phase when modifications were layered quickly, and performance improvements outpaced structural reassessment. That phase is common in high-level racing, where innovation routinely moves faster than caution. As AZN traced the point of origin, it became clear the flaw may have begun insignificantly. A micro-imperfection, a stress riser introduced during fabrication or early modification. On its own, it would have been harmless. Over time, under repeated load, it grew. That growth remained invisible until discovery became unavoidable. What made this especially troubling was realizing the car had effectively normalized the flaw. Systems around it adapted. Loads shifted. Behavior adjusted subtly, concealing the danger. This normalization is dangerous because it creates false balance. Everything functions until it doesn't. AZN understood the flaw's longevity did not equal safety. It meant patience. The defect had waited, growing slowly while performance remained high. Every successful run reinforced the belief that nothing was wrong, even as the margin for error narrowed quietly. With continued examination, the timeline clarified. This was not a matter of days or weeks. It had likely persisted through multiple seasons, enduring conditions that should have revealed it, but never crossing the failure threshold. That endurance was not comforting. It was frightening. This understanding reframed past moments. Runs that ended slightly off expectation, adjustments that felt necessary but unexplained, variations blamed on track conditions, or setup quirks now looked different. None had been failures. They had been warnings whispered too softly to hear. Within the Street Outlaws ecosystem, longevity is often mistaken for proof. If something lasts long enough, it is assumed sound. This discovery challenged that belief directly. Longevity can also mean delayed consequence. AZN felt that distinction immediately. The flaw's age did not excuse it. It condemned the processes that let it persist unquestioned, not through incompetence, but through trust built on repetition. The question of duration expanded beyond a single car. If this defect could exist this long unnoticed, what else might be operating under similar conditions elsewhere? That thought unsettled the room, not because it implied widespread danger, but because it revealed how easily danger hides within familiarity. No one in the garage spoke casually after that. The discovery shifted from isolated concern to systemic reflection. Time had transformed a minor imperfection into a potential catastrophe, and only chance had prevented disaster. AZN knew chance is not a safety strategy. The timeline mattered because it demanded accountability, not blame. Accountability to reassess what is assumed safe, simply because it always has been. Accountability to remember that evolution requires reevaluation, especially as speed and stress increase. How long it had been there offered no clean answer. It carried implications that would ripple outward. It meant acknowledging that past confidence had been misplaced, not by mistake, but by inertia. The car had carried this flaw silently, run after run, season after season. It trusted the system would catch it before it mattered. That trust had nearly failed. By the time AZN stepped back from the inspection, the timeline no longer felt theoretical. It felt immediate, not because danger was guaranteed, but because the illusion of safety was gone. The overlooked risk. The danger did not look dramatic, and that was exactly why it had gone unnoticed. What AZN and the others were facing was not an obvious failure, but a convergence of small assumptions that had quietly aligned into something deadly. In high-speed racing, catastrophe rarely announces itself. It waits for the right conditions, then arrives all at once. The compromised area sat at the crossroads of force and velocity, a zone engineered to withstand extremes without protest. Under normal conditions, it would have been among the last components to raise concern. That confidence had been earned through years of reliability, and reliability had gradually become permission to stop examining it closely. The risk that everyone missed was not born of ignorance. It was born of familiarity. What made this risk especially dangerous was how it would have revealed itself. There would have been no warning signs a driver could recognize, no gradual loss of control, no chance to abort. A failure in this area would have been instantaneous, transferring energy violently and without compromise. Survival would have relied on luck rather than preparation. As AZN imagined that scenario, its weight settled heavily. Racing culture accepts risk, but only with the belief that risk is managed, understood, and reduced wherever possible. This flaw represented unmanaged risk, hidden beneath layers of trust and routine. It violated the unspoken agreement between driver and machine. The missed danger also exposed a deeper issue in how safety is perceived. Inspections are often designed around known failure points, places where problems have appeared before. This flaw existed outside those expectations. It exploited a blind spot shaped by history, where past success was mistaken for future assurance. Within the street outlaws world, cars are living systems. They evolve continuously, absorbing new stresses as performance climbs. Parts once considered overbuilt become merely sufficient. Sufficient becomes marginal. Without intentional reassessment, margins fade quietly. This flaw benefited from that evolution. As power increased and setups grew more aggressive, stress shifted. Loads began traveling paths they had never traveled before. The compromised area absorbed those loads silently, adapting until adaptation itself became dangerous. This is how systems fail without failing, right up until they do. What unsettled everyone was how close this had come to being triggered, not by reckless behavior, but by normal operation. A slightly different surface, a marginally stronger launch, a fraction more grip. Any one of those could have pushed the flaw beyond its limit. The risk did not require a mistake. It required an opportunity. That realization reframed recent success. Clean passes no longer felt reassuring. They felt conditional. Each depended on the flaw holding just a little longer. Safety margins had been dictated by chance, not design. AZN understood this was the most dangerous kind of risk because it creates false confidence. When nothing goes wrong, belief hardens. Drivers push harder, teams optimize further. The system rewards behavior that unknowingly amplifies danger. By the time the risk reveals itself, response is no longer possible. The overlooked risk also challenged the belief that safety failures always result from shortcuts or negligence. This was not negligence. It was the cumulative effect of trust, success, and habit. Everyone involved had followed established standards. Those standards had simply stopped being enough. The tone in the garage shifted from shock to responsibility. Not responsibility to assign blame, but to adapt. The discovery demanded changes not just to one car, but to how others were evaluated. It forced reconsideration of what was assumed safe, simply because it always had been. This reckoning was uncomfortable. Racing thrives on confidence, and confidence resists questioning. Yet, the evidence could not be ignored. The risk everyone missed had been real, persistent, and unforgiving. Ignoring it now would not be optimism. It would be denial. Discussions turned toward how many other components might exist in similar blind spots. Not because widespread failure was expected, but because the principle had been exposed. Familiarity dulls vigilance. Success breeds assumption. Assumption hides danger. AZN felt the weight of uncovering something that could not be unseen. Knowledge changes obligation. Now that the risk was visible, it demanded action beyond repair. It demanded communication, reassessment, and a willingness to disrupt routine in the name of safety. What everyone missed was not a crack in metal. It was a crack in the process. A place where evolution had outpaced scrutiny. The danger was not confined to one flawed part, but to the belief that past reliability guaranteed future safety. By the time the discussion slowed, the gravity had fully settled. This was not a near miss in a dramatic sense. It was prolonged exposure that had gone unnoticed for far too long. The absence of disaster had been mistaken for control. The risk everyone missed had been hiding in plain sight, protected by trust and repetition. Now that it was exposed, it demanded a response equal to its potential consequences. Racing would continue. Ripples within the inner circle. The discovery did not remain confined to a single garage for long, not because anyone hurried to share it, but because silence carries meaning in close-knit circles. Within the street outlaws world, people sense when something foundational has changed. Conversations shifted tone almost at once, moving from casual updates to careful check-ins, from humor to deliberate pauses. Everyone understood that what AZN uncovered was more than a mechanical problem. It was a signal. The first wave of fallout was emotional rather than practical. Racers who had trusted their cars for years without hesitation found themselves replaying recent runs in their heads. Clean passes felt altered. Moments that once inspired confidence now felt like moments of exposure. The idea that disaster had been avoided by chance instead of design unsettled even the most seasoned competitors. There was no panic, but comfort was quickly replaced by vigilance. Teams began re-examining areas that had not drawn scrutiny in years, not because failure was expected, but because doubt itself had returned. Trust once absolute became conditional. That shift alone changed behavior across the paddock. What made the fallout so significant was how widespread it was. This was not limited to one build style or one level of racing. The flaw had taken advantage of a shared belief that some components are inherently safe simply because they always have been. Once that belief failed, it failed everywhere at once. Veteran racers were among the first to discuss it quietly, not with fear, but with recognition. Many remembered earlier periods when unchecked progress had led to hard lessons, moments when the sport was forced to recalibrate after near misses or losses. This discovery felt like another turning point, one that required adjustment before consequence demanded it. Younger racers absorbed the message differently. For them, the revelation challenged the assumption that mastery removes vulnerability. They had grown up watching dominant figures operate with ease, believing experience shielded against unseen danger. Learning that even seasoned teams could be blindsided reshaped how they viewed preparation and safety. Inside team garages, discussions grew more technical and more candid. Builders revisited load paths and stress assumptions long taken for granted. Fabricators reconsidered choices made under earlier performance limits. There was no blame in these talks, only urgency. Everyone knew the price of complacency was too high. Promoters and organizers followed developments closely while staying publicly quiet. Their concern was continuity, not image. Street Outlaws exists by balancing spectacle with survivability. Anything that threatens that balance threatens the entire ecosystem. The discovery pushed them to question whether existing norms still matched current speed and power. The fallout also affected trust between driver and machine. Cars are more than tools here. They are partners, extensions of instinct. Knowing a car could hide a silent, catastrophic flaw subtly weakened that bond. Drivers became more cautious, not in racing, but in mental preparation. For Azerbaijani Manat, the attention was uncomfortable but unavoidable. He had not sought exposure. He had stumbled into it. Still, knowledge carries responsibility, and others looked to him for grounding, not answers. His restraint prevented rumor and fear, keeping focus on facts and implications. The racing community has always accepted risk, but it has also survived by learning from close calls. The discovery reinforced that truth, reminding everyone that survival depends on vigilance, not bravado. Shifting the course. Once the initial reactions faded, it became evident that what AZN uncovered was not a temporary scare, but a defining moment. The discovery did not need headlines or urgent meetings to validate its importance. Its influence appeared in changed behavior, adjusted routines, and a shared awareness that something essential had shifted. When a hidden risk is exposed, the future can no longer be approached the same way. The earliest change was in perception. Safety had long been treated as a baseline, something assumed once familiar boxes were checked. The flaw AZN identified revealed how fragile that assumption becomes when performance evolves faster than the process is meant to protect it. The community came to understand that safety is not static. It is a moving target that must be pursued intentionally as power, speed, and complexity continue to rise. That realization reordered priorities. Teams began focusing less on whether something had ever failed and more on whether it could fail under new conditions. That subtle shift in language signaled a deep change in thinking. Past reliability stopped being a guarantee and became a reference point. Within the Street Outlaws ecosystem, that recalibration carried real weight. The longevity of the show depends on pushing limits without crossing lines that cannot be undone. The discovery forced an honest reassessment of where those lines truly exist, not where they were assumed to be. For drivers, the shift was internal as well as procedural. Trust in the machine became more refined. Confidence remained crucial, but it was now paired with curiosity rather than complacency. Drivers asked different questions during preparation, not from doubt, but from respect for the demands placed on their cars. Builders and fabricators felt the impact strongly. The discovery reinforced a truth they have long known. Every design rests on assumptions, and assumptions age. Materials respond differently as stresses change. What once felt overbuilt can quietly become marginal. What ultimately changed everything was the permission to question routine. Challenging long-trusted components was no longer seen as excessive caution. It became responsibility. Vigilance was reframed as professionalism. AZN's role in this shift was quiet but pivotal. He avoided drama and blame, focusing instead on clarity and outcome. That restraint allowed the community to respond together. The effects extended beyond any single team. The discovery became a shared reference, remembered not for failure, but for what nearly happened. Success gained new meaning. Survival regained importance. Oversight tightened without spectacle. The lesson was absorbed. What was uncovered here never made a sound, and that silence is what makes it matter. This was not a failure that announced itself, but a warning that arrived just in time. If you want to understand how the biggest changes in racing happen before disaster forces them, stay with this story. Subscribe, follow, and keep watching. The moments that save lives are rarely the ones anyone ever sees. This story doesn't end here. There are more quiet moments in racing that change everything before anyone realizes it. Racing isn't just about speed, it's about awareness. If this story made you think, stay with us. Subscribe more stories that reveal the moments that matter most, often before they make a sound.